Listen to that rain as it comes down on the tin roof. I think I'll miss this after I move. I think I'll miss the sound of cozy rain on my metal roof. The new roof is fine, but it's just not as expressive as this one. Sometimes I think this old place has character, and it's a character I wish I could bring with me. Though, maybe if I could get the repairs done on it that the new place has, I wouldn't have to leave. But at any rate, welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you started with some great stories from some great writers coming right up. This first one is from Jorgis Gorgs, 1977, and it's about an urban legend where the monster may not be exactly what you think it is. So let's hear a little bit about the urban legend of old Mr. Jeepers.
I don't even know if Mr. Jeepers was his real name or not. Nobody really did. We all called him that because of his famous catchphrase, "Well, Jeepers, that'll be a fun time," or, "Well, Jeepers, your kid looks like he's having fun," etc., etc. You see, Mr. Jeepers owned a little amusement park called Wally World. Go-karts, mini-putt, water slides, climbing rocks, a bunch of stuff for little kids. Now, you may notice I said owned, past tense. Mr. Jeepers got into a lot of trouble in the mid-90s. Why, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Mr. Jeepers was said to be a sexual predator. At least that's what the cops said, but Jeepers swore, hand to God, he was innocent, and that he'd never hurt a kid. But the cameras in the changing room told a very different story. Family changing rooms, men's changing rooms, women's changing rooms, over the urinals, over the toilets, over the showers. All in all, the police pulled 87 cameras off the property and 15 computer hard drives. I heard from my friend's dad at the time, who was a fireman, that they'd found something like 400 hours of kids changing or using the washroom. Now, don't get it wrong, I ain't saying he did it. I'm not saying he didn't. But one thing for sure is, Jeepers disappeared at the end of that summer, and I'm just going off what the story says. So, that same father's friend, who was a fireman, said that one night, 8 of the parents got fed up with waiting for the cops to charge Jeepers, and decided vigilante justice would be the best way to handle him. I know, right? How very Nightmare on Elm Street of them. So they went to Jeepers' house and got him to the door. Then they knocked him out with a taser and took him back to Wally World. This is where some of the stories go a little off the rails. Some say they drowned him in the wave pool slowly over an 8-hour period by tying his feet and ankles to a cinder block, then placing a life vest on him to progressively make the waves lower and higher. Others say they dropped him off the 4-story water slide. But the worst one, I heard they did stuff to him that's better left to the imagination, and the video exists somewhere online to this day. I've never seen it. Hell, I don't think I really want to. But one thing was for sure, Mr. Jeepers was never seen or heard of again. The police didn't do much of a bang-up job looking for him either, or his killers, but that's not the strangest part. So the 8 parents who disposed of Mr. Jeepers died off soon after Jeepers' disappearance. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were killed in Hawaii by a rogue wave on a sailboat. The Werners died of an accidental drowning in their pool together one night. The Mackenzies died falling from a water tower on a drunken dare. 4 stories. I mean, what are the chances they fell 4 stories to their death? Last, but certainly not least, were the Hoffmans. The Hoffmans were a very wealthy family in town. They owned one, if not the most profitable construction company of the day. They bought Wally World and were going to tear it down so, in their words, people could move on from the terrible tragedy. According to police, there was just one problem. A video was found in the Hoffman's house of Mrs. Hoffman strangling Mr. Hoffman with a broomstick while he slept, and she was later found tied to a cinder block at the bottom of their pool. The coroner said he never found any defensive wounds of any type, and there was no sign of a struggle in the house, according to the police. Hell, when the cops got there, after Mr. Hoffman's bloated corpse had gotten so ripe that the neighbors could smell it, they had said that Mr. Hoffman was still laying in bed, blankets over him, like he just laid there and let her do it. The video shows the same thing. Apparently Mrs. Hoffman walked up to her husband, his eyes open, and he had just opened his mouth. She then forced the broomstick down his throat until he stopped breathing. Then Mrs. Hoffman walked out of the room, and a splash is heard in the background. It turned out later that it was two of the janitors at Wally's World, Mike Milligan and Sean Avery, that had set up all the cameras, and they were selling the videos to the highest bidders. Mr. Jeepers' computer was found to have nothing on it, and all the video evidence was found in the janitor's office later on. They both got 20 years for the videos and distribution. Mr. Jeepers got an official apology from the town, and a plaque placed up on Wally World's main gate. "Happiest man alive. We miss you, Mr. Jeepers," was what it read. They reopened Wally World about a month ago after 15 years of being closed. The kids that go there now say there's a strange feeling, and even the parents say there's something off about the place. I took my kid there a few days ago, and I know for a fact there was a weird feeling in one of the men's washrooms. It was where the parents had apparently done in Mr. Jeepers, and I could have sworn I heard Jeepers coming from one of the stalls, but there was no one in there, except for me.
I guess maybe I'm feeling a little nostalgic about this old place, but I'll tell you, the one thing I won't miss is the squishy soft parts in my flooring. It never quite recovered after that hurricane 7 or 8 years ago, and it'll really be nice to walk on some floors again that I'm not afraid are going to kill me one of these days. This next story is brought to us by Matthew Dewey, and it's about another classic horror setting, the woods. So let's hear a little story about the trees that still weep.
I always knew there was some aspect of my life that was cursed. I tried to be reasonable about it, just assuming that I was making bad decisions. But there's only so much tragedy one can take as misfortune. I had more than my fair share in the past 20 years. It started with the birth of my son, David. His mother, Camilla, the love of my life, she became a shell. After giving birth to David, something happened in her mind. Something broke. She lost the ability to speak instantly, and as years went by, she slowly forgot how to do many things. How to drive, how to read, how to dress herself, until she was finally stuck in a wheelchair. I say forgot because there was nothing wrong with her body. According to our doctors, her nerves, her organs, her muscles, everything was in perfect order. It was all just her mind. It was unlearning all that she learned since she was born. Memories and personalities took much longer to go. I could tell from the tears that she sometimes cried. When they stopped, I knew Camilla was mentally gone. That took about 10 years. It was enough to break me, but I didn't have the luxury of curling up into a fetal position and melting into a puddle for long. I had a son to raise. From day one, David was perfect. David could do no wrong in any aspect of his life. Incredibly intelligent, progressing faster in school than any of his classmates. It was nothing newsworthy. There had been greater child prodigies, but I think he was just holding back. He had this spark in his eye when confronted with a problem. It was a confidence and a hint of amusement that told me that he had the answer already. As for his behavior at home, he was a pillar of the family. No father should ever have to lean on his son so early in life, but that's what I did. He was a rock. That's why I never got in his way when he wanted to do something. I let him do as he pleased because I had no reason to doubt that he could look after himself. I expected some kind of ego to develop. I expected David to take advantage of me and my weak parenting. But he never did.
David graduated from university at 18 and found a job almost immediately, thanks to some connections with other students. He was sending money home every month to pay for a caregiver who would look after Camilla, the caregiver being an ex-professor from his university. I assumed she was getting more money than what she was earning at the school. All those years, since the moment he could more or less look after himself, I heard the phrase, "Thank God you have David," from everyone who knew our family situation. You might even be thinking that right now, while reading this. Yet, I could never quite share that feeling. Without any real reason, I wasn't as happy with David as others were. He intimidated the hell out of me. He had this way of looking at me, reaching out with love, and even as his father, I could never make that connection. I couldn't even bring myself to like him. My son treated me better than any son had ever treated his father, and in my heart I felt the same way about him as I do about strangers I pass in an alleyway. I just wanted to keep my distance. That good he brought into my life should have helped me balance things out just a little bit, but tragedy always found me. I lost family. I lost friends. I watched my colleagues betray me and my work crumble. Even my pets didn't last long, so I stopped getting them. And although I never told anyone, I started to feel the reason for all of it was David. In my head, as damaged as it was, I blamed him. Not just for Camilla, but for everything. Everything. To see him leave the house was probably the happiest I'd been in a long time. That is until that caregiver he sent arrived, a month or so later. "Hi, Mr. Samuels," she said, walking into the house. "My name's Lilith Evans. I know your son, David." She shook my hand with a smile. My heart just about popped out of my chest when I saw her, this beautiful woman. I went cold again when she mentioned David. She didn't falter in her enthusiasm. Lilith explained why she was there, tears in her eyes when she spoke about how kind and amazing David was to care about his ailing mother. I don't think I said a word to her in our first meeting. I was too shocked, giving her hums and nods. I did speak to her the next day, but it was like speaking to David. I just ended up bending in her favor, letting her do what she would, taking care of Camilla and leaving me to my work. She had the same eyes as David, pouring with kindness, but for me, lacking any soul. I decided to give her the same treatment and just stay out of her way. "Mr. Samuels, we're leaving," she called to me from the front door. "Okay," I called just before she shut the door. Alone, Lilith was taking Camilla on a walk and had been doing so every day for the last 2 years. It hurt to say it like that, taking her for a walk, as if she was an animal to be looked after. Even now, with bitterness towards myself, I can't help but think it was a waste anyway. I focused on my work, and when I finished, I turned to the TV. It was good at distracting me and getting me away from my problems, from my feelings. I could go on a whole day feeling nothing, while something inside of me was begging to be resolved. I ignored it even then, staring at the mouths of actors I didn't know, trying to see how fake they were. I fell asleep. I woke up later, much later. The sun had settled and the room was dark. I had only the light from the TV to help me spot the furniture. Without a single question going through my mind, I went through the house, closing curtains, checking windows, locking doors. I grabbed a glass of water in the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes for too long, the light hurting them, so I just turned them all off. I would feel my way upstairs to the bedroom. There was a rail on one side of the stairs where Camilla's chair lift was mounted. My fingers traced along it. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. Trudging into the bedroom, I saw my unmade bed in the nightlight coming from the window. The cool blue spoke to my heart, and I fell onto the sheets. It was perfect. I knew I could only enjoy it for a moment. I had to get dressed and close the curtains, but I argued with myself before I finally got up. The window gave me a clear view of the backyard, the adjacent lake, and, of course, the woods. I saw the neighbor's swing set moving slightly in the breeze. Not squeaking, thankfully. I had snuck over one night and oiled the chains. A light flickered among the trees. I looked at it, wanting to see something. A beam of light, a flashlight. It turned away and continued deeper into the woods, though. I thought it was more than likely my other neighbor's going after his dog again. It tended to escape, and I closed the curtains. When I turned around, I saw that the door to Camilla's bedroom across from mine was still open. Her wheelchair wasn't in the corner of the room, and Lilith usually closed it after putting Camilla to bed. I then realized what was wrong when I climbed the stairs. The chairlift was at the bottom. Lilith hadn't returned with Camilla after her walk. I immediately called Lilith's phone, but she didn't pick up. The phone would keep ringing, only to time out. That left only David. He picked up almost immediately. "David, Lilith hasn't come back with Camilla," I told him. "Mom's here with me. I wanted to see her. Did Lilith tell you this afternoon?" I was asleep, I stuttered, remembering telling Lilith not to wake me up when I was napping. Maybe she left me a note. I'm sorry. Why did you want to see your mother? He could tell I was tense, even though Camilla was mostly gone in my eyes. I still cared enough about her memory to want her to be safe. "Relax. I just wanted to," David explained in a calm voice. "I haven't seen either of you in 2 years. Just wanted to see Mom and Lilith while driving through the neighborhood." "Where in town?" "Oh, Lionel Street, I think. No, where are you staying?" David gave me the address of a motel and told me he would come around in the morning if I was available. Of course, I said I was, and we ended the call shortly after that. I sat down at the end of my bed, fell back, and was asleep as my head hit the sheets. Looking back, I was stressed. David was back. "How's Aunt Grace?" David asked from the other side of the table. He held a cup of coffee with both hands as if warming them. He had a kind smile. "She passed away shortly after her husband," I said. "I tried not to think about losing my sister. About a week after you left." I said that last sentence with a little too much anger, but I tried to pass it off as sadness. David looked down, his face painted with concern. After a long moment, I finished my coffee, and David looked up again. His black hair had grown into flowing waves around his chiseled face. "I liked her," he said. I mumbled. "Where's Camilla?" "Lilith is looking after her." "Dad," David sighed. "Do you want to see her? Do you want Lilith to bring her here?" I just want to know where she is." "Where else would she be?" It was a simple question. David was being reasonable. I just didn't like his attitude. Seeing him again put me on edge. Looking at him, I couldn't find a single fault. He had grown into a handsome young man, but he looked nothing like me. I didn't see any of my weakness in him. "Why are you back in town? Problems at work?" "No, work is good," David sighed again. "Speaking of work, I'll come back another time with Mom. You still have those meetings every Thursday, right?" I nodded. "Okay, I'll leave you to it then." David got up and left. I didn't follow. I listened to his footsteps and heard him close the front door. I let out a breath, something I'd been holding in longer than I felt I knew. My heart was pounding. I picked up my empty coffee cup and put it in the sink. I then walked over to grab David's. The cup was still scalding hot. I hissed and wiped my fingers. It had been over half an hour since I poured it, and it still hadn't cooled down. I dumped the hot contents and rinsed the cup out angrily. There was always something to send me over the edge. I ended up taking that cup out of the sink and throwing it as hard as I could into the trash, wanting it to break, but some other trash cushioned the fall. I spent the whole day staring at a whiteboard and a ream of paper on my desk. Markers were at hand. I needed to write something on the board, but I was too distracted. Being stuck in my head, I couldn't help but play out the talk I'd had with David. No matter which way I looked at it, I couldn't help but see myself as an asshole. I didn't really care about Camilla. I was happy seeing my son, and damn it, I respected him enough for sensing my discomfort and leaving when he did. "What the hell is wrong with me?" I murmured. "Seriously, I blinked, and it was night again. I put the marker down and made my rounds. Curtains, windows, doors, finally ending up in my bedroom. I looked out at the lake. The swings were squeaking again. A breeze rustled the trees more than it disturbed the lake. I heard the familiar pitter-patter of droplets hitting the earth outside. Rain? Where are the clouds? I said to myself, looking up at the sky. I could see the stars. No rain on my house, and not a droplet hit my face, but I heard rain nonetheless. I looked down at the ground, but I couldn't see anything. Out of curiosity, but mostly escaping my own thoughts, I marched downstairs, seeing as I was already dressed, and opened the kitchen door to the backyard. The sound of rain was closer, but when I pointed my phone light at the ground, I didn't see anything. I then listened closer and realized the sound was coming from the nearby trees. It didn't sound like leaves. There was no way I was confusing the two. I walked over to the tree and was almost immediately soaked in water. I stepped back out of the downpour and turned on my phone light again. From the branches and the leaves, rain fell thick and fast. It pooled on the ground and soaked into the earth. The sight of it left me silent and thoughtless. When seeing something that just didn't make any sense, my mind struggled to try to make sense of it. What snapped me out of it was the sound my ears picked up amongst the patter. Crying. Weeping. Coming from the tree, so low and pathetic. It was the kind of moaning sob that only those who were grieving could make. It was how I cried the many nights that followed Camilla's degradation. Only that was a long time ago. Yet the thought of Camilla seemed to get the cogs in my mind moving again. I looked down at my phone and wiped a few stray droplets from the screen, hovering over David's number. I wanted to call him, but I knew no matter what he said, I would just want the call to end. Instead, I turned back to the house. The weeping followed me as I entered. Even when the sounds of the drops faded, those cries echoed. I got into my car and drove off the property, heading to the motel David was staying at. It probably sounded hypocritical for caring all of a sudden, but if you were confronted with trees that sounded like you in a moment where your heart was breaking, going to Camilla was the best thing on my mind. Arriving at the motel, I saw a few cars parked out front. One room had the lights on. I heard the TV playing through the thin walls. I could understand that. For some people, it was the only way they could get to sleep. I saw David's silver four-door parked in front of one of the dark rooms, so I assumed that it had to be his. Definitely not the best place to be looking after one's ailing mother, but I didn't care to question it until I was standing in front of the motel. I wanted to call Lilith and ask her what she was thinking, leaving Camilla with David in such a place. But then I noticed her car was there as well. It made me angry. With a sudden wave of responsibility for my wife washing over me, I marched up to the door and thumped it with the meat of my hand. "David, it's me. Let me in, or—" "Jeremy?" It shattered everything inside of me. My heart felt so hollow that I thought it might collapse in on itself. My bones were glass, cracking under the weight of my flesh. I stepped back from the door, and it opened. The light was on inside. Camilla was standing in the doorway, her body frail and skinny. Her eyes were wide and scared. I knew her body had wasted away, but it seemed to be less saddening when she was in a wheelchair. When she was standing and moving, she looked like a starving prisoner. Yet, I was the one who buckled first. She took a shaky step towards me and fell forward. I caught her in my arms and held her against me. She was so light. A bony hand reached up and touched the side of my head as I cried into her shoulder. As her fingertips graced my skin, there was a cold plunge and a sudden fall. It was the same sensation of suddenly falling into a dream and waking up. Only this time I was soaked in rain, kneeling in front of a dark, empty motel room. The door was open. Blood had stained the doorway. I was breathing with a burst of adrenaline. I was in danger, or at least I was a moment ago. I stood up quickly and stepped into the motel room. There was blood on the bed, the walls, the curtains. I could see the dark shapes of bodies on the ground and an empty wheelchair in the corner. I stepped out, unable to investigate any further. When I had the stomach for it, I trudged over to reception. I had to make a call. Camilla and Lilith's bodies were covered and carted away. Camilla was untouched, not a scratch on her. Same could not be said for Lilith. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, but her wallet and car remained in the parking lot. It was safe to assume that it was her. David is the prime suspect in the investigation, although I don't hold much hope for that. It's only because I said so that he's being investigated at all, but the receptionist reports a different name, a different man entirely, renting that room at the motel. There was no record of David returning to town. Nobody to say he wasn't either, though. Lilith was the only real connection, but there was a problem with that as well. There was no transfer of money into her account from David, or anyone. She was a professor at his university, but he never took her class. Nobody there had ever seen the two of them speak. From the outside, it looked like a random person was playing caregiver for my wife, and I just went along with it. I didn't say anything about what I had seen before finding the bodies. I haven't told them about the ill feelings I had towards my son. It's better to leave as much of the unexplained out of my statement. Yet, I believe, since no one has found a reasonable explanation for what happened, mine is the only one that matters. Mine is the only one that pieces things together, that confirms the fears I have regarding my son. That there's something wrong with him. That he isn't the kind of man everyone thinks he is. Only, I'm too old, too afraid to do anything about it. I haven't had any communication with David since. I retired from my job last year, and I live alone. Oh, books, books, books. When did I get so many books? Not even the books that I've written. I mean, I have a ton of those too, but these are all just books I keep meaning to read. Jim Butcher and Dean Koontz, and of course, my favorite, Stephen King. I think there's even some fantasy novels in here, but we won't go there. That's a part of my life I try to put behind me. Speaking of stories, though, let's move on, shall we? This next story is by J. Wilder 517, and it's talking about a subject that I wish I was a little more familiar with, since my current house doesn't really have one of these, but my new one definitely does. So let's talk about the thing on the porch.
I've always had a weird knack for staying out of trouble. It's difficult to explain, but whether it be feeling or sense or just a tingling, it's always been there, for as long as I can remember. I wish I could say it always made sense, or that there was always a aha moment where I understood what was happening, or even that it made it a little less terrifying when it was happening. But that's rarely the case. I just know it always seems to work. I'd like to tell you about one of those less vague times it happened to me. Back in my early 20s, that's the late 1990s, I decided I needed a change. I left my childhood home and moved in with my uncle on the other side of the state for a couple of months. Enough time at least to get a job, find an apartment, and get myself situated for college. This was a big move for me. I'd spent a lot of time traveling, but I'd never really lived more than 10 miles from where I was born. It was both exciting and scary. Scales tipped towards the exciting, of course. We lived in a backwoods town few people had ever heard of, even now, but it was close enough to a major city in Florida. When I told people where I lived, I usually just said, it's between Gainesville and St. Augustine, rather than go through the "you lived where" conversation. It's a rural area. Not much more than red clay and a bunch of drying up lakes well past their prime. When giving people directions to the house, we actually told them, every turn you come to, just take the one with the hard road. The first intersection without a hard road, turn right. 2 blocks past that on the left, it's the only house on that side. I don't think I ever even learned the names of all the roads on the way home. I just aimed for the hard roads. The house was pretty secluded. I don't think there was much neighborhood behind the house, just woods. The property sat on an intersection of clay roads, with woods across the street to the front, and one side of the house. The other side was an empty lot, and then, you guessed it, more woods. I remember it was a pretty big yard, maybe half an acre or so, completely enclosed with a chain-link fence. The house sat right in the middle of the property. If you walked to the front edge of the yard inside the fence, you could see the neighbor's driveway a little farther up the road on the other side. My uncle loved the place, not being able to see or hear anyone in any direction. I thought it was creepy as hell. It was a small house, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. The living room had 2 exit doors, one to the front and one to the side. Each led out onto the large front porch. Look, I know it's not a good thing, but I'm a smoker, like a freight train kind of smoker. It's a family thing, an unhealthy curse handed down by each generation. It's like you weren't even considered an adult until you sat on Grandma's porch and smoked with her. Hell, that's how you spent time with Grandma. You sat on the front porch, chain smoked, and talked about whatever needed to be talked about. I sure do miss that woman. I've never cared for smoking in the house, and my uncle was trying to quit, so we set up a little smoking table and a couple of chairs on the front porch. He was an early-to-rise, early-to-bed kind of guy, and I was just the opposite. I didn't go to bed until 2 or 3 in the morning, then slept in until 10 or 11. The hours you keep working at a restaurant, I guess. So I spent most of my evenings after work on the porch, usually reading a book or talking on the phone to friends back home. There wasn't much road traffic to speak of, even less after I came home from work. It was summer, and my cousin, my uncle's son from his first marriage, had come to spend a couple of weeks with his dad. We're a pretty tight-knit family, so the kid, aka Little Man, was more like a little brother than my cousin. He was around 4 or 5 at the time. The house only had 2 bedrooms, so we set up a pallet of blankets on the floor in the living room for him. I made a fort of it every night before he went to bed, stretching a sheet between the couch and the coffee table over his head. There were big windows next to either of the doors, and the blinds were old and kind of dog-chewed, so we liked to be covered up at night. I wasn't sure if it was so he could see outside, or that he was worried something on the outside could see him. Either way, I could sympathize. On this particular night, I put him to bed and retired to the front porch. I called a friend of mine back home and proceeded to talk the night away. Kind of weird, the things we did before cell phones. We actually talked to people. I miss it sometimes. It was a typical warm southern night. Mid-80s temperature, not a breath of a breeze, and humid as all get out. Nights out there could really go either way. You either had a cacophony of frogs, crickets, katydids, and the occasional alligator, or worse, you damn near couldn't hear yourself think over all that silence. The chorus of nightlife was going strong that evening, which is actually pretty cool. If you've never heard it, each type of insect, critter sings together, matching the rest in volume and cadence. And then, one crescendos, briefly shutting out the others before going back to rejoin the chorus. Every so often, you'll hear a couple of competing soloists, duelists maybe, louder and louder until one wears out. It's mostly background stuff, and you usually tune it out, but it's neat to stop and listen. Until it just stops. That was how it started. I'm talking on the phone, mostly listening, honestly, and the critters are singing in the background. I remember feeling just the briefest chill, not enough to really notice at first, and then everything went quiet. It didn't fade or lower in volume. It stopped. The chill settled in. She was still talking. I could hear her voice in my ear, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring into the wooded lot across the street. There wasn't anything to see over there, but I couldn't stop looking. I don't know if it was my uncle, a previous owner, or maybe the county, but there was a sodium vapor street light in front of the house, just outside the chain link fence, a little to my right as I stared out there. It gave a decent amount of light to the front of the house, and was really nice when you were bringing in groceries after dark. But this night really underscored my issues with the light. The bulb itself was mounted directly to the pole, rather than extended away from it. An extension of some type would have provided a little more light in every direction. At least I think so. The way the bulb housing hugged the pole itself, though, hard shadows ran behind the pole across the street, complete darkness spreading in a, 90-degree arc behind the light pole. I guess it's a juxtaposition of light versus dark in that part of the yard, but the space behind the light pole was the darkest part of the night, and that was where I was looking. I tried to shake it off. Admittedly, I can get creeped out pretty easily. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and I know I can scare myself without much help. So I decided to just ignore it and get back to the conversation. I opened my mouth to say something, to chime into whatever we were talking about with something witty, I'm sure. Be quiet. It's not really a voice, but sometimes it comes across as one. I knew there was no one actually talking to me, just my brain reacting to and dealing with something. So I'm well aware it's my own head when I hear a voice like that, just to be clear. But when I do hear it, I listen. This is that thing I mentioned when I started. That always keeps me out of trouble. It wasn't the first time I had heard it. I could hear my friend going on through the phone in my ear, but it was distant. I could also hear something from across the street. This was the summer of '98, just remembered that. And it was a North Florida summer marked by droughts and fires. The underbrush was dry and crisp. Something over there had just taken a step through it. I didn't really know what to do. I could feel my heart beating in my temple. It felt like something was looking at me, right through me, in fact. It was uncomfortable, and more than a little evasive. I didn't like it. I wanted to go inside. Don't move. Okay, we aren't moving. Check. Done. She was telling me about a new restaurant back home, how she and a few of our other friends had been there and liked it a lot. I needed to go when I came to visit, and she stopped by to see my mom the other day and had a great time at the house. It can hear her. A dry twig cracked under its weight. I couldn't just hang up on her. If I did, she was going to call back. It struck me as a very bad thing to have the phone ring while I was out here. My hand was shaking, holding the phone to my head. Wendy, I have to go, I whispered to her. She meant to say something else, but I cut her off. That thing is happening right now. I have to go. Something's out here. I'll call you later. Be careful, she said, and hung up. She and I were close friends, have been for years, and she knew what I meant. I clicked the phone off and put it on the table. It was one of those big curled cordless models with the stubby little antenna. I remember them being very popular back then. Worried she would call back, or I'd be killed because of some weird wrong number call at 2 o'clock in the morning, I flipped the ringer off. Another step from across the street. Then another. It was walking faster now. It was definitely closer than it had first been when I heard it. I braced myself, ready to jump up from the chair and run in the house. Don't! It's watching! So I didn't. I listened. I can't even explain how much I wanted to just up and run right then. There was an exhalation. I didn't really know how to explain it. Not a snort or a grunt, but a hard exhalation, then a scrape, and another step. Get inside! I damn near turned the table over as I jumped up from the chair and ran for the door. It was only a few steps, but it seemed like I'd never make it. And it really didn't help that I could hear the thing across the street breaking into a run. Twigs and branches snapped and crunched. Something broke over there, I guess as it ran through the brush or a low-hanging branch. Now it was out of the woods. There was a thumping as its feet hit the hard, baked clay of the road. Right as I made it inside and got the door shut behind me, I heard the clang of the chain-link fence as something hit the top rail. surely vaulting over the top and into our yard. "Lock the door." I'd barely twisted the deadbolt on the door when a voice came again. "Turn off the light." The only light in the living room was from a weirdly elaborate light fixture attached to the ceiling fan. I called it the Venus flytrap for the strange, flowery stained glass petals surrounding the bulb, which always tinted the light to a pale green. I grabbed the pull cord and killed the light. Slam! Something hit the door from the outside. It sounded like whatever had been running at me just headbutted the door. That was the picture in my head, at least. I don't know how I didn't make a noise. It scared me half to death. The blinds shook in the window beside the door, a dry, rustling sound as they rubbed the wood on the frame. Hide! I thought about going in my room, which was the furthest point in the house from the door, but my cousin was sound asleep in the living room. I wasn't about to leave him out there by himself, but waking him up seemed like a very bad idea. Another angry pounding against the door. The blinds shook. I wondered how securely fastened they were to the top of the frame. What if they fell? What if they fell off the window, and I ended up face to face with something outside staring at me? All I could think was, if that happened, the street light might be to its back, lighting up the house, and I wouldn't be able to see it with the light in my eyes. I don't know why I even thought about that, but it scared the hell out of me. I got down on the floor and climbed into the fort we'd made earlier, between the couch and the coffee table. It seemed as good a spot as any. Little man stirred a bit, and I settled next to him, but he didn't wake up. More banging on the porch, sounding like the table was being dragged and pulled away from the wood floor over there. Another bang, and under all of that, the best word to describe it, breathing. It was somewhere between a snort and a growl, something out of breath. A quick snarl punctuated by more banging furniture. It slammed into the door again and growled. To say I was scared was a monstrous understatement. I didn't know what the hell to do. What if it stopped hitting the door and started hitting the window? The voice in my head was quiet, though. As much as I could, I just trusted it would be saying something if there was anything I could be doing. And I laughed at myself for waiting on the voice in my head to tell me what to do. I probably didn't laugh right at that exact moment, but you get the idea. It jumped off the porch. I don't really know how to explain that sound, except that you could feel its weight on the wood planks out there, and then it wasn't there anymore. Straining my ears to hear something, anything, all I could think was that it was finally gone. It was going to leave us alone. Slam! This one from the door to the side of the living room. I didn't hear it over there before it hit the door. I think I might have yelped or something when it hit. Little man shook a little, but he was still sleeping. A couple more scrapes and bangs outside, and now it was panting. Again, I'm wondering about that window. It felt like luck that it hadn't hit it from the front porch. Too much to hope for that it wouldn't find the one on the side porch. But it didn't. Maybe a minute or two later, or really my perception of time is so screwed up that it could have been half a minute or half an hour. It was just gone. I heard it jump down again. Its breathing faded. I braced myself for another bang, but all was quiet. I don't know how long I laid there, hugging little man to me, not really sure who was comforting or protecting who. I eventually fell asleep, waking up to the smell of breakfast and coffee. The previous night came back to me pretty quick. I was happy to see everyone up and around. Both my uncle and little man were up and around already, and I felt more than a little silly for climbing under the blanket fort in the living room. My uncle just grinned at me and said he'd slept in the living room with the little guy a few times himself. I went for the door, really needing that first smoke of the morning. It felt like I had earned it after last night. Little man stopped me on the way out. Surprised me, just came up and hugged me. I had to kneel down to catch him so he wasn't just hugging my knees. It was a good hug, deep and heartfelt. He pulled away from me and looked at me like I didn't think a kid had ever looked at me before. "I'm really glad you're okay," he said. "I had a bad dream that you were outside and got eaten up by a monster across the street." I think all my blood froze right then. I don't know if I wanted to laugh or cry. I told him I was just fine. No monsters for me. They don't think I taste good. He laughed and was done with it. He went back to the kitchen and helped his dad make breakfast. And I really needed to smoke. It was my last scare of the morning, but it was a good one. Not really sure what I was expecting, but the yard around the house looked like a war zone. My smoking table was in pieces. parts of it in front of the house, other parts in the side yard, and one of the legs was out in the road. One of the chairs was nearly disintegrated. We never found the other one. We kept a big metal bucket full of sand on the other side of the porch, a butt bucket. It was on its side in the far back corner of the yard. It weirded me out that the sand and collection of butts previously inside said bucket were nowhere near the house or the bucket, but in the front corner of the yard. No matter how many times I've thought about this, that part never really made any sense. How did that thing get the bucket to the backyard? Why were the contents dumped in the front yard? What the hell was it that it could have carried the bucket to the front yard to dump it in the first place? My uncle saw me checking out the yard, came out on the front porch to join me. I remember he whistled when he came out, surprised to see the yard. It's funny now, and I think I nervously laughed then. He asked if I was throwing a party after he went to bed every night. He cocked an eyebrow at me and rubbed at the fresh dent on the front door. Not quite. I wasn't sure what to do. Still, so I told him everything that happened the night before. To be honest, I really thought he was going to laugh at me, make fun of me for overreacting, and I was never going to hear the end of it. He didn't, though. Instead, he told me he'd had a couple of weird things happen to him out there, too. Said it really bothered him to come home after dark, that he hated not being able to see across the street because of that street light, and that he'd seen things on the edge of the fence, but mostly across the street. He went back inside, and he showed me where he kept the 2 rifles and the handgun, well out of sight, but within easy reach in a hurry. And I really wish he'd stopped there. I think it's something else, though, he said. Whatever it is out there, it feels smarter than that. I think it knows us. I don't think I'll ever forget him saying that. I tried to get him to say more, but he wouldn't. And he wouldn't speak about it again. I was only there a couple of more weeks, thankfully uneventful weeks. When I left, I never went back to that house. Something about it after that night just didn't feel right. I wish I had more to tell you, or a better explanation for what exactly happened that night. But that's how it happened.
Whew, I tell you, the more I move, the more I think I need this time every day to just sit back and relax a little, rest some, maybe put my mind at ease. I know I don't talk about it often, but it's kind of a big step here, and I'm a little bit worried about it, you know? What if I can't make a go of it? What if YouTube, doesn't pan out for me? But I remind myself, that this is what I chose, so now I have to own that path. I don't think it'll be a problem. You guys come back every day for Cozy Horror, so I see absolutely no reason why you wouldn't continue to come to listen to great stories by great people. Speaking of, let me stop complaining over here and get to the next story. This next one is by Dr. Marlum, and it's a story about something we don't often think about being horrific. It's something that comes into our life and we don't always notice. Boredom, mundanity. So let's hear about that terrifying shadow that we call mundanity.
Everyone preaches, love thy neighbor. Everybody opposes the oppression of capitalism, colonialism, and every other ism out there. Countless people who couldn't point Ukraine out on a map are now chanting glory to the Ukraine. An obscene amount of people who didn't care about the British monarchy are now protesting its existence. The moment evil rears its ugly head, the public pays its full attention solely to it, usually leaving the victims as an afterthought. Nobody cares about the victims, because they're faceless statistics, to be flaunted in opposition to the charming and charismatic faces of the darker side of humanity. Again and again I've seen this happen, as the portraits of the things that took my nephew, portraits I've provided the authorities, are displayed all over the news. It's always that monster whose face they show. It's always the stupid nickname they gave the murderer that I keep hearing. The Gray Woman, the Child Cannibal, Fish's granddaughter, and so forth. I've yet to hear anyone mention Arthur Coughlin, or any of the other kids she took. Nobody cares about my nephew. He's a statistic. They found the dead kid decomposing in a ditch with 5 other kids' corpses. They act like it's meant to protect the children and their families from reprisal, or to protect the identities of the minors. It's all BS. There's no ratings. There's no outrage in showing the faces of some nameless victims. They don't matter, and neither do their families. Arthur's mother, my sister Annie, she's dead. She killed herself, unable to cope with the grief of losing her son. She couldn't stand seeing the face of that bitch who took her kid. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror in the last few months of her life because nobody could find, see, or know anything about that woman. She was too mundane, too average to be noticed, too slick to be caught, too monotone to even attract attention. My camera caught her on video, in the act, and yeah, she's just an average Jane Doe you couldn't tell from a crowd of Jane Does. Dark, middle-length hair, average-sized eyes, average head, average body type. Simply unremarkable. It all started about 3 years ago, when Arthur kept complaining to Anne that he'd been seeing someone coming to him at night. A lady is what he called it, describing it to be nothing short of a mundanely dressed human being. He kept telling Anne that whenever she showed up, he wouldn't be able to move for a while in her presence, and would only regain mobility once she faded into darkness. Seeing as how it was my sister's son, she couldn't convince him that there was night terrors or sleep paralysis. The kid was adamant that something was watching him, and that's where I came into the picture. I offered to place cameras all over the house to prove to him that nothing was haunting him at night. After that, we finally quelled his fear of the demonic lady that was disrupting his sleep. I showed him the footage recorded during nights the strange apparition frequented him. At first, he argued the surveillance footage couldn't see ghosts, but eventually he relented and learned to deal with his reoccurring nocturnal inconveniences. The nagging stopped, and everything was fine in the world again. Until one morning, I got a call from my sister, right after finding out I had 10 missed calls from different relatives. Annie was frantic and panicking. Her voice was cracking as she choked out her own tears and was on the verge of losing her battle against exhaustion. Arthur had disappeared. He was nowhere to be found. No one had seen him, not the neighbors, not any acquaintances, nobody, nothing. As if the world had simply swallowed him. Without even thinking, I raced for Annie's, nearly killing myself in my reckless driving to reach my sister. Once I got there, we were both erratic, and my mind and body flew on autopilot. I pulled out everything the cameras had recorded and started searching for whatever had happened to Art the night before. He was in bed by 8:30. Everything was fine and uneventful for the next 5 hours. We all watched in dread and horror as a figure suddenly appeared in frame in his room, as if out of nowhere, a shadow crawling out of nothingness and taking the shape of a person in the recording. I rolled it back multiple times and couldn't find anything or anyone breaking in or entering. She just appeared. The next few minutes became the most haunting moments of my life. Anne, my parents, and I all watched the footage of this figure approaching Art's bed and picking him up before turning and facing the camera, smiling at it and leaving the room, disappearing once again from sight. The way she looked, the way she moved, the way she picked up the kid and left, everything was normal, mundane, unassuming, average to the point of eeriness. Anne completely broke down. She wept and cursed at the screen and wailed for her child to be returned to her. Our parents tried to comfort her, as I did my best to describe what I'd seen to the police. The manhunt for that bitch had begun. Unfortunately, it yielded nothing but a pile of dead bodies. 3 weeks after the disappearance of Art, we found his body, with the remains of 5 other kiddos. All of them were in varying stages of decomposition. The oldest remains were completely skeletal. The face of that monstrosity was everywhere. News, posters, papers, everywhere. She'd infected the entire universe with her presence. Yet, nobody had ever found anything. Not even a trace or a thread leading to her. Absolutely nothing. It's almost as if she never existed. 3 months after Art's death, I became a father. 2 years later, I fathered twins. Anne never recovered. 6 months ago, the last straw broke the camel's back, and Anne took her own life. When I found her, she had a poster of the ghoul paused on her TV screen. She hanged herself, unable to bear seeing the growing legend of this monster again and again, while simultaneously seeing her child's memory fading into obscurity. I didn't have it much easier. All this grief, all this pain, it was taking a toll on me, and I noticed myself developing a habit of drinking a bit too much. If my wife hadn't found me hanging by one hand from our 4th-story apartment, I would probably be dead. It wasn't intentional, I don't think so at least. I don't remember enough to know. I've toned down my drinking since, and I never drink alone anymore, now that I have kids to raise. No matter how much better my life has gotten, one thing seems to get worse. I think I've conditioned myself to dread the diabolic face of that monotone creature. With every viewing of her portrait, I've felt more and more uncomfortable around them. I don't know if it's the paternal instinct or what, but I just came to a point where I can't stand looking at that unremarkable face anymore. It makes my skin crawl, despite its averageness. It all came to a head a few days ago, as I was walking back home from a football game. It was raining, and I was lost in my thoughts when I bumped into someone. We apologized to each other, and only then I saw the person in front of me. My body and soul froze, pins and needles pricked my skin, and a rock formed in my throat, threatening to suffocate me right there. The pounding of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I watched the world turn still and black. My gaze locked into the mass of humanity in front of me, average in stature and size, the empty yet piercing eyes, violating and welcoming all at once, far more terrifying than any psychopathic stare. The unassuming evil yet innocent smile formed with that mauve, unmatched yet improbable malevolence, the monotonous and monochrome presence of an impossible humanoid shape was obviously inhuman, yet so very human. A stifling sensation of fear paralyzed me as I stared into the non-existent soul of the misanthrope that had taken the life of my nephew, that could have committed an entire genocide with its stare alone. An eerie calm emanated from this human-shaped nightmare and turned my entire body into stone as it smiled at me. Time froze all around us for a second, and it felt like an eternity while my life was being sucked into that black hole that constituted the eyes of this devil that took so much from me. I came face to face with the woman that took so much from me, and found myself being paralyzed by the terrifying shadow of mundanity that surrounded her until she finally retreated from sight back into nothingness.
One more story for you, and then I think it'll be time for me to get back to packing, because I'm nowhere near done yet. It's strange sometimes, the amount of stuff that a body can accumulate in one house, and I seem to have accumulated about twice as much as your normal everyday person. Coming to you from Aaron Braderman, let's hear a story about a recollection from a time that was maybe not so great. Let's hear a retelling of the siege of Fort Ond. The following is a transcription of an audio cassette I discovered in my father's safe shortly after he died. The tape has been transcribed for you here in its entirety, for my own sake. Can you say that again? Which part? The date, Dad. The recorder wasn't close enough. I want to make sure we get everything. Why is it so important that you get every last detail anyway? Because that's what the doctor said, Dad. The more detail we get, the better he can help you. Oh, is that right? He's gonna help me, huh? How's he gonna do that exactly? Stuff some more magic pills in my pocket? Maybe sign me up for group therapy? Those are always loads of fun. No, I think he just wants to get a better understanding of... He can't help me. Nobody can. Better psychiatrists have tried and failed. You wouldn't believe me anyway. There's no point. Well, if nothing else, it would help us and the doc to make better decisions regarding you. Look, I promise that I'll listen to everything you have to say. I promise I'll believe you. All right?
Don't say that. You can't promise me something like that. It's all bullshit, and you know it.
All right, fine, fair enough. I promise that I will try to believe, okay? I'll try. Look, forget about the doctor, all right? I want to know what happened that night. Me. I want to know what you were doing in Norway. Why you can never get a good night's sleep. Just tell me. Please.
Fine. It's February 20th, 1943. That's when it all went down. The Axis powers had been almost driven out of Africa, and the Soviets had efficiently turned the tide of war in Eastern Europe. We had the Nazis on the run, for the time being, at least. They were vulnerable, sure, but they still had every capability of rebounding and kicking our asses. As such, the U.S. was particularly interested in taking out any and all Axis weapon development programs.
Weapon development programs? What, like tanks or atomic bombs or...
Exactly. The Allies, specifically, targeted their hard water factories to cripple their production of atomic bombs. But there were other targets. Their so-called Wonder Weapons project, scattered all over German-occupied territory. Manufacturing depots, chemical weapons labs, bioweapon research centers, etc., etc. That's what I was doing in Norway.
Where in Norway did they send you?
Northern Norway. Far off the mainland lay an island with a Nazi outpost on it. Very little was known about the place at the time regarding its exact purpose and mission. According to our spies inland and the Norwegian rebels, the locals referred to it simply as Fort Ond. They said it was a bad place, that the prisoners who were taken there were never seen again, that the water bordering its shores were barren of all aquatic life and colder than even the most bone-chilling frostbite. Command didn't give a shit about any of that, though. They were only concerned with two things. Why is this installation so far away from German homeland, and why is it so far from mainland Norway? The conclusion they came to was that the Nazis had to be developing some sort of weapon that they didn't want to risk infecting a lot of people with.
So they thought it was a chemical weapons plant?
No, they thought it was a bioweapons lab. Smallpox, anthrax, that kind of stuff. We thought that's what they were doing there, but we didn't know for sure. That's when my unit came in, and where Operation Maelstrom was greenlit.
Maelstrom?
I didn't pick the damn name anyway, so they wanted to keep the operation as covert as possible. Minimum manpower. One squad of British SAS, one squad of Canadian Commandos, and last but not least, one squad of Army Rangers, including yours truly.
What was the purpose of the mission? Just to gather intel, or,
Our first priority was the eradication of the fort's inhabitants and the seizure of any relevant intel. However, we were also prepared for it to turn into a sabotage mission at a moment's notice. Leadership felt pretty confident about the bioweapons theory and didn't want to take any chances with letting the stuff potentially get away, hence the limited manpower. The last thing we wanted was for the Krauts to get spooked by a large invasion force and flee with the samples.
Dad, are you okay?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Really? You gotta do that now, huh?
What? Oh, I'm sorry. Is the smoke gonna bother your little nose that much? Would you prefer I did it somewhere else?
I'd prefer you didn't do it at all, though in a way it's oddly inspiring. Senior citizen, part of the greatest generation, still puffing that shit all these years like it's of no consequence to your health.
To hell with the consequences. Can I continue now, or is this going to turn into an intervention? 'Cause if so, tell me now so I can save you the time and just leave the room to enjoy the rest of my smoke.
No, please, continue.
We were all flown to Iceland for our briefing. From the moment I arrived, I had no doubt about the operation. The sheer lack of intel we had to go off regarding fort-sized manpower and the exact purpose just seemed odd to me. I remember thinking to myself, I hope there's enough men. When I did so, I caught my friend Weathers looking around too. I could tell he was thinking the same thing. From there, we boarded a British destroyer that took us less than 10 miles from the island. We had to travel the remaining distance on our own in 2 PT boats. I remember just how cold it was that night, how we all subconsciously stood closer to each other than normal in a vain attempt to stay warm, like a bunch of penguins, the lot of us. It was a half-an-hour ride to the island, so we stayed like that for a while, just hunkered up and trying to keep warm as much as we could while we waited for any sign of something. When we were about a mile from the island, we got the sign. We saw it long before we got near the stuff. When we did, we all went silent and watched as we slowed down our boats to make a cautious approach. A thick fog had blanketed the sea around the coastline in all directions for about half a mile. It had a faint red hue to it. Not a deep red, just a faintly visible one. It towered above us nearly 15 feet in the air like a tidal wave and seemingly stared us down. We slowly crept our boats up to it inch by inch until our bows were nearly kissing it. From there, a few of the Canadians on the adjacent boat got some equipment and began prodding the fog for any signs of toxin. We all sat there and waited for them to finish their work. As they did, I took notice of the absolute unnaturalness of it all. It made no movement towards us, nor away from us, yet it billowed and contracted and breathed soothingly in places like you would expect a body of smoke to do. I remember distinctly thinking of it not as a wall, but more like a veil or a curtain, hiding the island from us. A few minutes later, the Canadians signaled over to our boats and gave our commander, Captain Hawks, the thumbs up. The fog wasn't toxic as far as they could tell. Given our mission, though, we couldn't take any chances of it being gas of some kind. Better safe than sorry. So we donned our gas masks and made sure our suits were nice and sealed up. I, in particular, had taken the liberty of duct taping around the gloves and boots to ensure it was tight. Then we started our boats back up and slowly sailed into the unknown. First, I couldn't see anything. The fog was so thick it limited my visibility to just a few feet in front of me, and even less in front of that boat. We couldn't have our lights on for fear of being spotted. When we were out in the open water, this was fine, of course. The moon and stars lit up the surrounding water nicely. But now, there was little to no light penetrating the fog, and we were engulfed in near total darkness. So we just slowly inched our way forward, safely as we could. I just sat there and watched the red vapor hit and dance off my goggles when I searched for any sign of land. For a while, nobody said a word. We all just waited for what seemed like an eternity. The longer we pushed ahead, the tighter the grip on my rifle became as my nerves started up. Finally, one of the Brits broke the silence. I watched him tap the man in front of him and heard him whisper, "You sure this is right?" His sentence was quickly interrupted. We had landed. The entire boat shook wildly as a few of us lost our footing and had to grab the side walls to stay upright. As we did so, I looked around me and noticed the fog gradually growing thinner as we made our approach. Steadily, its opacity diminished. I could begin to see shapes through the veil. The crunching noises ceased a few seconds later, and with them, so did the fog from my line of sight. It was still there, but it was thinner and lower to the ground than it was on the open sea. It only came up to our knees from that point on, which meant I could finally see our objective, the island. It was a mess of scattered, jagged rocks and hills, caverns and towering cliffs that seemed to scatter in all directions, like a porcupine made of stone. At its center, one giant hill stood out. I followed it from the base to the peak with my eyes, and at its peak there was a door. That was it. No trace of human life, no pathways, no trenches, no buildings of any kind. Nothing that would suggest any sort of operation that we were undertaking on the island. There were a few guard towers, of course. We knew at least that much from our aerial photos, but we had chosen our landing site specifically to be in a blind spot they wouldn't see us from. That was it, though. Apart from the door that stuck out amidst the terrain, looking utterly unnatural in the distance, there was no sign of life. No buzzing insects, no splashing fish, no chirping birds, not even the wind itself seemed to bow before the island's authority and ceased completely. No life whatsoever. I thought back to when my first encounter of the fog and just how right I was in my thought process. We truly had crossed a veil of some kind. Captain Hawks gave the hand signals. We all filed out and patrolled inland as fast as we could to a nearby cave. The Norwegians were waiting for us there.
The Norwegians? Were they the ones who gave you the fort's intel to begin with?
The very same. Adding them to our roster brought our total to 35 men.
Dad, it's okay. Take your time.
We headed into the cave and linked up with the Norwegians, who sat steadfast in a defensive position. One of them stood up as soon as we breached the darkness of the cavern and swung his gun over in our direction, shouting at us, presumably to lower our weapons, before quickly lowering his own to make a half-hearted apology. Hawks was livid. He stormed over to the man with one forceful strike of his fist and sent the poor Norwegian hurtling towards the ground. You some kind of fucking moron, kid? I was this close to blowing your goddamn head off. The commander of the Norwegians rushed over to stand between the two of them. Please forgive us, sir. We've been on the edge since we arrived a few days ago. It was an honest mistake. He helped his fallen soldier back to his feet and ordered him to the back of the cave to tend to his face. Afterwards, he and Hawks stared at each other for a few seconds in silence while we all just waited to see who would speak. The leader of the Norwegians spoke first. Something is wrong, very wrong. Our intel is severely off, he said. None of the guard towers have occupants, and we haven't seen Nazi soldiers patrolling the island in 3 days. We've been spying on the island for weeks now, as best we could. The entire time we did so, the soldiers were patrolling the shores, manning the towers and watching the coastlines. But 3 days ago, this fog emerged, obscures our vision, and made it nearly impossible to see anything on the island. Since we arrived, we've done multiple sweeps and scouting runs along the island's surface before you arrived. No one is here, American, not a soul. It's like they just vanished, at least from the island's surface. I looked back over at McKinley, who did the same. We exchanged confused looks at one another before looking back at the two leaders, who were now talking too quietly for anyone to hear. Finally, Hawks turned to face us and gave a deep sigh. We think the Nazis have locked themselves away in the fort's cave system and interior. According to our good buddies here, the island's surface is safe. Let's hope they're right. Conduct final checks on all your equipment, then form up by the cave entrance. We're going in. So we got into formation and made our way up the rough terrain to the door. It was the one I had spotted when we had landed. As far as we could tell, it was the only entrance to the interior of the fort. The absence was nerve-wracking. The cold, wet staircase that led up to the fort entrance proved difficult to scale with all my equipment. which was made all the more dangerous, of course, by the fog. With it clinging about knee level on every surface of the island, made it damn near impossible to see where you were stepping, so we just slowly tiptoed our way up to the door as best we could. All the while, nobody uttered a word. So quiet I could hear my own heartbeat throbbing in my ears. Eventually, we reached the top of the stairs. The door itself was monolithic.
Monolithic, huh? What, like ancient?
Oh, yeah. Stood nearly 9 feet tall and looked like it was made out of bronze or copper. I don't know, some kind of faintly orange metal. It was covered in strange engravings that could only be described as hieroglyphics. They weren't, of course, but that was the only comparison I'd been able to find since that day. And believe me, I've tried. I looked through every damn book I could think of. Nothing comes close to the symbols and markings I saw engraved on that door. It was like a foreign language of some kind. Didn't look like it was written or chipped away from the door by an expert's hand, so much as it looked like it was slashed or cut, like something had hacked its way in with claws or teeth to create the strange writing. It didn't look like a human hand had done it neither. Looking up at the door, I felt like an explorer, like I'd found something lost to mankind for millennia, and I was rediscovering it. Only I didn't want to be the person to discover this. At that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to be aware that this place existed, let alone be the one to have to open that damn door and walk into God knew what. We readied our explosives, expecting to have to breach our way in. To our surprise, though, the wooden beam that was attached to the door lifted. The monolith opened slightly, and with it came a stench of utter and all-devouring rot, like pus and spoiled milk, bile and sulfur, all fused into one unholy concoction that assaulted my nostrils and instantly forced tears down my cheeks. First I panicked, believing my mask wasn't secure, tight enough, and I was inhaling a toxin of some kind. But when I looked up and saw that all my team members were doing the same, our masks all working fine, we couldn't have all had potential leaks, right? The smell was truly just that powerful. The door had only given way and opened a tiny bit. A front man quickly had to ask for help as the door was too heavy to heave by himself. 4 men, including me, pushed with all our mights and then quickly ran out of the way as soon as the door was completely open, so the guys behind us could aim down that opening. When they did, they didn't see much. Their flashlights shined straight into a wall angling down and away from us. What lay before us was another staircase, carved out of the very stone of the mountain itself. The fog clung lower to the ground past the doorway, only coming up to about ankle height, but it still obscured the steps all the same. We stared down the doorway, waiting for orders to advance, but Hawk said nothing. He just stood there with his gun trained ahead and his other hand held up, silently telling us to wait. I suspected he was listening, waiting to hear any communication from us opening the heavy door, for any sign of enemies. There were none, however. Not a sound could be heard from down the staircase, just like everywhere else so far. Goff leaned over to me and tapped me on the shoulder. "Something's not right, man," he whispered. I did not respond. I didn't feel I needed to. Everyone was already thinking the same thing anyway. No point in vocalizing it, especially not when I think we could all see what Hawks was thinking. I watched a chill run up his spine that shook his held-up hand and rifle slightly in place. I'd never seen him like that before. He steadied himself, and with a low, reassuring grunt, which was probably more for his benefit than ours, he gave the order, "File in." So we went. We descended for about 20 feet. The staircase itself was dark, but we could see light at the bottom. The sight of light was a relief. Instantly, I felt a tiny shred of my anxiety wither away as my instincts took hold. I readied myself for any Germans that might be waiting for us at the bottom. There were no Germans, though. None left anywhere. None alive. When I reached the bottom of the staircase, the scene laid out before me like something you'd see in a crime scene. It was a big square room illuminated by gas lanterns in its center. The door directly ahead of us led to an opening in the floor with a ladder hooked to it. 2 doorways on our left and right, like a plus sign or a cross. Various crates and workstation desks lay toppled over, all facing the direction of the newly discovered staircase, like sentry posts. They all faced towards the same point, scattered throughout the room where the Nazis, half sunken in the fog and slightly obscured by it, draped over the crates, leaning up against the walls, crumpled up like soda cans in the corners. There were at least a dozen of them, their blood pooled beneath their feet, but I hardly noticed it through the tinted fog. I took a step forward, and that's when I heard the familiar jingling of empty bullet casings beneath my feet. Subsequently, bullet holes could be seen in nearly every square inch of the wall in front of us. "Jesus Christ," Weathers shouted as we entered the room, prompting Hawks to hold up his hand and signal for us to shut up. "Whoever the fuck did this might still be here. Stay frosty," he muttered sternly to us. "Fan out. Check the room on our flanks," he commanded via hand signals. Half our men went to the room on the right, while the remaining went left. I, along with 3 others, stood guard in the lit room, kept our guns trained on the ladder ahead of us. As I knelt behind a crate to take a better defensive position, I noticed one of the Nazis was laying face down in a puddle of his own blood. I kept my rifle trained ahead as I slowly reached over and heaved on his shoulder, forcing him to roll onto his back. He had a look of utter terror frozen on his face, with eyes wide open and mouth agape. He bore cuts and large slash marks up his chest and torso, which caused his entrails to expose themselves slightly. I looked around the room at the other men to verify, and sure enough, the ones who were submerged in the fog shared similar wounds of size and volume. The fuck happened here? I thought to myself. That thought was quickly overtaken by a doubly terrifying realization. I looked at the bullet holes directly ahead of me and thought, whatever the hell happened here, I'm standing in the same place they were. After a few tense moments of sitting with that realization, the squad checking the right room emerged, holding a few books and folders. They bore similar engravings to the ones seen on the door upon our arrival, and were bound in leather so ancient that it looked like the faintest breeze would disintegrate them if they weren't careful. They showed it to Hawks, who took one of the books and began sifting through the pages. At first, he scanned the pages carefully and thoroughly, but he quickly thereafter began to shuffle through them frantically and impatiently, before reaching back and shoving it into his pack. Right about that time, the squad from the left room emerged. A British soldier approached and said, "Just more dead krauts, sir. There's something. We found cages big enough to fit a human in. There were bodies in them, but they weren't German civilians," the Norwegian team leader interrupted. "These were fucking animals." Hawks looked like he was getting ready to say something, but he didn't get the chance. All conversation and thoughts were stopped when the sound of screaming could be heard down the ladder. With one uniform motion, all remaining men turned their guns to face the same direction as I already was. We waited for what felt like an eternity for a head to come bobbing up in the opening of the floor, for the sound of footsteps, for any sign of enemies. Nothing came. After a few minutes or so, Hawks gave the order. We were going down there. I really didn't want to do this anymore.
Dad, please, you can do it. Just take a second, okay?
The smell, Patrick.
What about it?
I can't get it out of my nose. It's been 60 goddamn years since then, and I can't get it out of my nose. God, by the time we reached the bottom, Garf had already vomited. I had to fucking cover him while he did it. Good thing I hadn't eaten anything before the briefing, else I would have too. When we reached the bottom, there was nobody, just like the rest of the island. No signs of life.
What did you see at the bottom of the ladder?
Well, it was a large cavern-like room with multiple passageways that branched off in all directions, but at its center was a well, made out of the same stone as the mountain. It somehow looked older, more ancient, more monolithic. Along its rim were the same damn etchings and carvings as the door. Upon closer examination, we saw what the source of the fog was that had plagued us since our arrival. We watched it for a while and observed the fog billowing up and out and over the top, well, in all directions at a constant, unnatural rate. Couldn't believe that such a tiny source could have produced as much as we'd seen up to that point. I couldn't believe that the colossal wall that we'd encountered upon our arrival originated from such a minuscule well deep in the mountain. As we spread out to cover the other passageways, I approached it and leaned over. Patrick, the smell was so strong that I was thrown back onto my hands and knees almost immediately from the stomach contractions. It was the source of the fog, of the smell, of everything.
What was in the well?
Blood. The whole fucking thing was full of blood. More blood than I'd ever seen in my life. More than the room upstairs. More than any other mission I'd ever seen on. And it was fresh. It boiled gently. It seemed to move on its own as though it were alive and aware of our presence in the room. And when I gazed upon it, the attack on my nose and stomach seemed like one of calculation, as though a cobra had spat in my face for daring to get too close. I wasn't allowed even a second to recover from the stench, however. At that exact moment, we heard more screams. Seemingly every passage in the cavern emitted what I can only describe as a wail of anguish, like the flesh was being peeled off somebody's forearm and pouring salt back into the wound at the same time. They pierced all our ears like razor blades and made me wince so hard I almost forgot about my stomach pain. How big is this place? I thought to myself. What the hell could be happening just down those tunnels? Fuck this, Hawk said. Start planting charges. We are getting out of this place as soon as possible. It was music to all our ears. One of the soldiers came over to check on me and the rest as we began to start laying charges. There was nothing professional about our process. We were just laying them out as fast as we could so that we could get the hell out of that stenched place and back to the boats. The screams continued the entire time we worked.
Were they getting closer?
I don't know. They sounded like they were coming from every passage all at once, but it was hard to tell. We had a man eyeing down every doorway just in case, though. Didn't matter. We should have been watching the walls. As I struggled to compose myself to get back to my feet, I had a front row seat for what was about to happen. Garf, the poor bastard, he was doing his rounds, laying his charges along the floor, round the well. I wanted to speak up, to tell him not to get too close, but I was still sucking in air through my teeth and couldn't get the words out. All I could do was hold my hand out to him and grunt. He turned to face me. "You gonna make it?" was the last thing I heard him say. At that very moment, an arm shot out of the well behind him, locked itself around his neck, and pulled him in head first. The arm was inhumanly long, more like a tentacle than an arm, but its form was undeniably human. It wrapped itself around his neck and dug its fingers into the side of his face as it dragged him deeper and deeper down. I watched him thrash around and kick his legs wildly in vain as he attempted to get free, spraying torrents of blood in all directions around him. He was already halfway submerged by the time our men got a hold of his feet. When they did so, another hand shot out of the wall and locked itself around Goff's waist, now pulling him in faster. I could hear gurgling and see bubbles of air making their way to the well's surface. Poor bastard was drowning in that putrid liquid. The men pulled with all their might, but it didn't slow down his descent in any noticeable way. They heaved and barked orders to the others like rabid dogs, desperate to save our comrades, but no help came. We were alone with the incomprehensible, and it was winning. The rest of us simply stood by dumbfounded and watched as he was forcibly dragged into the well, inch by inch. When it was clear that the men could do nothing more, they let go and took a few steps back. Their entire arms were covered in blood to the elbow. For a moment, nothing happened. Nothing said a word, moved a muscle, did anything. We all just faced the wall and tried our best to process what had just happened. Didn't last long. The well began to gurgle and bubble as though it were digesting my friend. It began to overflow, slow and thick crimson liquid oozing over the top of the well and onto the cold stone floor beneath, making its way towards us. I was the first to move. I stood up and began to slowly step backwards towards the ladder. That's when the massacre began. In an instant, all hell erupted around us. The same arms that had dragged my friend to a then unknown fate sprang out of the walls around us as the island became alive and began to frantically swing around, searching for bodies to claim. A few of them found their mark and pulled some of the men towards the walls, wrapping themselves around their necks and locking them in place and suffocating them. Any sense of composure our toughest men had remaining left their bodies that very moment, and we all made a mad dash for the ladder. The room was only dimly lit by all our flashlights, though. When we broke our formation and began to run, our visibility became significantly limited. Bodies ran into each other, and men began slipping on blood that now reached for their feet. The fog had all begun rising in intensity at a startling rate, and was now almost as thick and copious as it was out on the sea. This made it all the more hard to tell what exactly was happening, and before I knew it, I was knocked onto my ass by one of the Canadians as he ran straight into me. The blood rose higher and higher at an inconceivably fast rate. It was halfway up my knees by the time I regained my footing. When I did, I felt a sudden rush of movement brush past my leg. That's when I saw it. There were shapes moving in the blood, large, serpentine-like shapes that slithered all around us and began to quickly encircle my team. Like sharks, they enveloped us, poised for the kill. They seemed to be probing us for weaknesses, waiting for the exact right moment to strike and take as many of us down as they could. I wasn't going to let them get me. My body moved independent of my paralysis psyche as I sprinted for the ladder and reached as high as I could to escape the cavern. However, the ladder was barely wide enough to fit one man on it. It was made of wood and was not meant to support the weight of more than a couple of men at a time. I remember just how careful we had to scale it just to get down to the cursed room in the first place. I worried it was going to give way any second, and I'd be stranded in that room with those things, with the well. I felt it crack and buckle beneath me as more men than intended all tried to climb it at once. I pushed into the men above me, just as the person did below me, all in a desperate race to escape. Just when I was sure all was lost and I'd never make it out, I reached the top and rolled onto my back. As I did, I heard a loud snapping sound, followed by 8 loud splashes hitting the liquid below. I rolled over and shined my flashlight down the hole to look at the scene and try to help some of the men escape what would now become a tomb. It was no use, though. It was 20 feet down. I couldn't reach any of them. Weathers, McKinney, they stared up at me and shouted for help, but what was I supposed to do? The blood had risen to above their waistbands by that point, and there was more of those fucking things circling them. They climbed over one another in a desperate attempt to get enough height to reach the exit, but I was nowhere near enough. I felt so helpless. I watched the mysterious shapes and figures in the blood creep up to them from behind. Then, as if coordinated, in an instant, they pounced and dragged 3 men under the murky depths at once. In that split second, when they had leapt from the pool to attack the men, I caught only the faintest glimpse of their true form. They were like eels or leeches with spider legs and beaks. Something of that family, but it's still not an accurate comparison. They were truly otherworldly, inhuman, even to creation itself. They were abominations that I'm glad they were obscured by the fog, as to have glanced upon them in all their unholiness would have been too much for me at that moment. They yanked the men down into that ocean of blood. As they did so, the men thrashed around chaotically and knocked more men over, making the already futile pyramid of terrified men all the more pitiful. That's when I noticed the 3 that were taken by those serpents were being dragged towards the well. They were being dragged to the well so it could devour them, just like Goff had been taken away to that unspeakable fate. I looked at the edge of the room to search for the first victim of the attack, the one who had been forcibly dragged towards the well by the arm. When I found them, I felt my stomach churn once again. Their bodies were halfway into the cavern walls. Their arms were dragging the men head first into the island itself to be consumed. It was as though the island was alive, the well was alive, and it wanted us dead. The remaining few screamed and pleaded and begged for me to help them. All I could do was stare down at the chaos before me and watch. I was ripped out of my comatose state by a firm hand on my shoulder. It was Hawks. "Get up. We gotta get out of here." He picked me up by the back of my shirt and dragged me to my feet, pushing me up the staircase. I didn't have a plan. I just ran. My body was truly on autopilot. I couldn't think of anything other than the men we were leaving behind, and the looks I saw on the faces of those men as they screamed at me for help. The fog had now completely engulfed the inside of the fort, and I struggled to maintain my footing as I ran as fast as I could through the first chamber and up the staircase. As we exited the main door, I was stopped dead in my tracks. I heard gunshots behind me. By God, they were still alive. They were still fighting to get out, and I was abandoning them. Hawks once again yanked me by the back of the shirt as he went past, encouraging me onward. "There's nothing we can do for 'em. We gotta get to the boats now." And with that, he ran off ahead of me through the red smoke. Every fiber of my being compelled me to go back, but my body refused to obey. I just stood there trembling, white knuckles grasping my rifle as I struggled to make a choice. After a few agonizing seconds of contemplation, I followed after Hawks and made my way to the boat, to freedom. As we sped away from the island, I was able to slowly creep back to the real world mentally and finally take note of my surroundings. It was me, Hawks, and 3 other British troops. Only 5 men had made it out. None of us said a word. We all just kept to ourselves and stared off into space, doing our best to process what had happened. I looked back at Fort Ond one last time before it disappeared over the horizon. The fog had grown larger now, redder, hungrier. When we got back to the destroyer, we told command everything that we had seen and what had happened. They didn't believe a word of it. I can't really say as I blame them. We must have sounded insane. Showing up, missing 30 men, covered head to toe in blood, rambling about a mysterious well, our friends being dragged away by an unknown creature to an unknown fate, ancient bronze doors and slaughtered Nazi soldiers. They told us that we had most likely been exposed to nerve gas, that the base was being classified as a possible chemical weapons lab, and that when we inhaled the fog, maybe we were subjected to hallucinations. But we were sealed up head to toe. We stood up for ourselves as best we could. We all corroborated each other's stories and validated each other's testimonies. We swore up and down till we were blue in the face that the island was not what they thought it was, that our friends had been killed by an unknown force, and that we had to destroy the fort. They just stared at us like we were a pack of lunatics. They had made up their minds about what had happened to us on the island. Any attempts made by any of us to get the record straight only served to make us look even more insane. I turned to one of the admirals and spoke up one last time. I had to know something before they turned us away. Please tell me you guys are going to level that place. He stared at me for a few tense seconds before simply saying, "We'll handle it." And with that, it was over. All the remaining members of Operation Maelstrom were discharged the next day, deemed medically unfit to continue service. Each of us was briefed individually on the events of that night, and I was told not to utter a word to anyone about the events of Operation Maelstrom, or to disclose the fort's location to anyone. The colonel who was briefing me told me, "For the record, I believe there's at least a little truth to what you told us. But regardless, you and the survivors are a liability now, unstable and erratic. We can't risk putting any of you onto another operation, not after what happened to you, or at least not after what you think happened to you. I'm sorry, but this is for your own good." I was put on a plane the next day and sent home. That's it. You don't believe a word of what I just said to you, do you?
Well, no, not all of it. I mean, I want to, but it's a little much to
I know how it sounds. You think I don't hear myself saying this shit to you? I know how it must sound, but it's true, son. The well is real. What happened to me was real.
Look, I'm sure it must have felt that way, Dad, but you have to...
You don't believe a word of it. Nobody does. You, the doctors, every other person I've confided in just thinks I'm a lunatic who imagined all of this. I see the way you're looking at me, like I'm just a poor old man who's losing his mind. I know what I saw. I know what I went through. You weren't there.
I know I wasn't. I'm not saying I was, Dad, but come on, work with me. Isn't it possible it was a nerve agent or something? How the hell would you know it wasn't?
'Cause we all saw the same damn thing. All the survivors of Maelstrom gave the exact same testimony upon our return. Everything from our encounter with the fog to our return to the ship was synced up perfectly. What do you think, we all hallucinated the same thing?
No, I just think maybe...
You know, they took the books that Captain Hawks acquired. Oh yeah, they made sure we kept nothing from our mission, stripped us bare right after we returned to the ship, but told me what he saw in those pages. More of those strange symbols, those hieroglyphics of unknown origin. the mention of Torzer Hole, some kind of portal to hell or somewhere worse or God knows where. You want to know why I can't sleep at night, Patrick? The real reason is 'cause I know it's still there. We'll handle it, they said. Yeah, like hell they did. They probably just set up shop themselves and tried finishing what the Kraut started. Or maybe not. Maybe they heard our warnings and listened to us. Maybe they shelled the place into oblivion and actually did handle it. But I'll never know, son. I'll never get my closure on the events of what happened that night. I'll never get to know with 100% certainty that the well has been sealed and that whatever lies in the depths of Fort Ond can't get me anymore.
Let's just take some deep breaths, okay? Why don't you just calm down and...
This was a waste of time. It always is with people like you.
Dad, come on, please.
We're done here. Turn that damn thing off and get...
The tape ends there. I couldn't find any additional tapes in my father's belongings, so for the time being, that's where the story ends. I didn't know my grandpa too well. He died when I was 12 and was reclusive. Sadly, this tape is one of the only glimpses I've gotten into his life. I don't know what to believe. It's easy to write him off as crazy or the victim of a gas attack, but the fear I heard on that tape sounded way too real. It's gotta mean something, right? If nothing else, the torment he endured was real, and maybe that's all that matters. Or maybe, just maybe, he's right. Maybe Fort Ond still stands, exactly as he described, hidden somewhere behind the veil of fog. And just like that, our stories are at an end once again. But don't be sad. We'll be back again very soon with more great tales for you from Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.